Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fridays at 4. Fridays at, you fill in the slot. You tell us what time zone you're in. I'm Karen Taylor of the Color Vowel Chart. It's lovely to have you here in this session about duet reading. Folks are still entering the room, but we'll go ahead and get started with a little background because I know some folks watch this as a recorded session. I'm Karen Taylor, once again, of the Color Vowel Chart and the Color Vowel Approach to Teaching Spoken English. We host a regular gathering of teachers, many of whom are Color Vowel trained, others are Color Vowel curious, but we all gather around the idea of teaching with a way that we know how the brain works and we know how to teach efficiently and effectively. Claire Schneider is one of those teachers. Hi, Claire.
Hi, everybody.
And she's our main presenter today. But I'm imagining that many people have come today because they're curious about the teaching of reading, possibly, the teaching of fluency, including spoken fluency. Maybe something else has brought you to the table, like you already use duet reading in some way, or you just had never heard of it before and you were curious to know what it is and what it has to offer. I see lots of familiar faces in the room. Please go ahead and open the chat so that we have a nice open dialogue there. And let us know where you are. And maybe if duet reading is new to you, you've done something that you think is similar, maybe a little context for what brought you here today. Okay, you're welcome over there. And meanwhile, I'll go ahead and give a little bit of context to our topic today. Duet reading is a strategy made popular through a lot of public school reading programs, specifically RTI. Raise a hand if you are familiar with RTI. Yeah, response to intervention. Anyone who's taught in early grades there, thinking about early or vulnerable readers may have been trained in RTI strategies. And duet reading is one of those. So it could be that some folks in the room have come with that background. And again, others have just come to this brand new. But either way, as often happens with effective strategies, duet reading has caught on in related educational contexts, including the teaching of English as a second or foreign language with child and adult English learners. Claire is one of those teachers who's taken it over to the work she does with adult English learners. Claire Schneider holds a TEFL certificate from the School for International Training and has taught English for over 10 years. She's originally from South Africa, and her teaching career started in Santa Fe, where we met very early on in this journey of Color Vowel, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she taught English to immigrants at the Santa Fe Community College. That's where we met. And during that time, she was actually one of our piloting teachers of strategies like Color Vowel Yoga, flooding, and one of the early testers of Color It Out, our literacy game, if you're familiar with Color It Out. If you're not, I'm going to put it over in the chat, or you can go to colorvowelgames.com for more information about that game. Okay. Let's see. Claire and I have co-authored a chapter in John Murphy's book called Teaching the Pronunciation of English, focus on whole courses. That was a lot of fun to do. Dr. Robin Barr, who will wave her hand, she was an editor of that chapter. We're really grateful for your work on that. In 2016, Claire founded her own school called Language Matters. It's a private language school, and it provides in-person cultural and language immersion programs, as well as online instruction with a focus on pronunciation. Claire has created a unique program with her school, Language Matters, in that she combines high-quality Color Vowel language instruction with experiential learning and travel. What that means is hiking and visiting places and talking about it. No better place than Santa Fe to do that kind of thing. I'll turn this over to Claire, who's going to talk to us about duet reading and share with us how she uses it with adult English language learners. Claire, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen, for that very nice introduction. And yes, we do go back a long time together. What Karen didn't say was that she was my boss, and she gave me my first job in this amazing field of teaching English as a second language. And I loved it from the beginning. And I also became an instant disciple, you could say, of Color Vowel Chart. And none of my students escape this experience. It's not a very hard sell. At first, it might seem different because they're only familiar with other methods, but once they start to get the hang of it, they really love it too. And so thank you all for joining me today. I'm really excited to share this technique that I've been doing for quite a number of years with my students. And I would say that it may be my favorite, or certainly one of my favorite techniques that I ever use with students. So I'm very happy for this opportunity to share it today. I also recognize that this is just one technique in the space of reading and helping our learners with reading. And there are many other ways to do it. The focus of today is on the duet reading technique, but hopefully at the end, we might have some time for us to share more ideas about how you work on fluency, because I know that there's just a wealth of knowledge amongst all of you, and I'd really love to hear some of your ideas too. I just wanted to let you know where I got started with this method. So a few years ago, there was a conference put on in Albuquerque by the state of New Mexico, and it was actually an overnight conference, and I signed up for the reading track. And there was a woman there called Kathy St. John. Some of you may know her. She often presents around the United States, and she coached us in this method. I don't come from a public school background, so I wasn't familiar with it. But I immediately thought this would be something interesting to try with my students. And so since then, I've done it with all my students. And what's transpired over time is, and with the arrival of AI and so many online sites, is that it's become a method that students can learn, and they can do it by themselves. So I'm always looking for ways for my students to become independent learners. And this is something that they can do by themselves. And I will have a chance later in the presentation to show you a student who was doing it by herself, and she made a video of it. So I think that I'd like to go ahead and, well, before we get started with actually doing the practice together, because I do want to go through each step with all of you, I thought I'd just ask a sort of a general question about what you think are the components of being able to read fluency. What are some of the important aspects? And if you'd like to just write your comments in the chat, that would be wonderful. And while you do that, I also wanted to say that I always do this activity near the beginning of a semester or a program, because I find that it's very encouraging for the students and motivating. And then also they have the chance to sort of perfect, or not perfect, but to practice the method by themselves with me as support during the semester. So that's typically how I do it. And while it could be used as a basis for a lesson, and there's so many ways we could take this, I actually do it in a fairly sort of systematic 5-step method. It's quite mechanical, actually, and I don't elaborate on it, but there are many ways it could be used. I will just show you the way that I use it, and I'm sure you'll, hopefully it'll spark some inspiration for you, where you might think, oh, I could take this and use it in a slightly different way, because that's what I've done over time. I've actually adapted it. All right, so let's see some of your, okay, what does fluency mean? Okay, rhythm, background information. Yes, so with chunking, yes, absolutely. All these are great suggestions. This method actually does not focus on comprehension, even though I do put that in the assessment. I'm more curious to find out if students, by rereading a passage, do they start to understand more or not? But it's actually not a focus of this technique. This is more about just the reading part. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I prepared some slides. And if you have any questions along the way, please put them in the chat. Okay, hopefully you can all see my slides. Let's get to the first one. All right, so here we are. So we've already covered this, where you've given your ideas. I just wrote a few here, which a lot of them overlap with what you said. Now, Kathy St. John, who taught me this method, was involved in this project at the San Jose Public Library. And this was a project to help people who spoke English learn how to read. So I'm not going to show much of this, but at the end, if there's time, I would like to show you the end of the tutor reading with the learner, because it captures her emotions really nicely about how she feels after she's gone through the process. But I'll just leave that till the end to make sure that we have time for that. So if it's okay with all of you, we're going to just dive in and start the technique. So this will take probably about 10 minutes. So this is if you have to get up, or you've got something you need to do. If you this would be the most important time for you to be on the screen. And after that, you'll have some opportunity to listen to my students. I have some recordings, and there'll be more opportunity for discussion. So it starts like this. Now, it might look a bit overwhelming, but I thought it'd be easier to put all the steps in one slide. And we're going to go through each step, because I don't know if you're like this too, but for me, when I attend webinars like this or workshops, if I don't actually do it and experience it fully, I'm less likely to use it for my students. So I really like when I go to a workshop and I can go through the steps of a technique, and then I will experiment on my students. So if you would just bear with me and join in as much as you can, as much as you'd like. And so it starts off where the student, and in this case, you, if you'd like to participate, you're going to read a passage aloud for 1 minute. Now, in order to do this, you will need to be able to record on your phone. The phones do come with a recording app. If you are not familiar with where it is or what this is on your phone, I was thinking perhaps another option would be to just video yourself. So hopefully that's not a technological barrier for anybody. And I'm going to show you the text. Now, this is not a text that I would use for my students ever, but I looked for a sophisticated and advanced text that might be a little challenging for some of us as fluent English speakers. So that I hope that gives you an idea of what it might feel like for a student. And so you're going to read the text for a minute and record yourself. That's the first step. Now, when you read for a minute, please, I'll show you the text. It's from the time machine. And please remember where you stop. So I'll put the timer on for a minute, and you'll be able to hear that when it pings. That means you're going to stop. And of course, if you're in the very middle of a sentence, you can finish it. But more or less, you're going to stop at a minute, and you're going to remember where you stopped, because it will be different for everybody. Are there any questions about that instruction?
Could you enlarge the screen just a little bit?
Sure.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And are we supposed to record ourselves or not?
Yes, if you'd like to have the full experience, you'll record yourself. But this would be something that, well, we'll talk about the options later, but for now, we'll just go through the steps. Okay, so is everybody ready with your phone? You're going to record or video. Okay, here we go for a minute.
Oh, before you start, Claire, some people are not muted. Some of the participants need to be muted.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Would you mind, should I do that? Or can you, I think I can do that.
Yeah, if you do it, then it won't mute you, Claire. If I do it, you'll be muted.
Oh, I'll be muted. Just begin. Is that in the mute section?
I can take care of it. Let's just, here we go. Click on participants and we can do that.
Okay, thanks, Karen.
Mm-hmm. And now, Claire, you'll need to unmute yourself.
All right, so I'm going to set the timer now, and I'll see you back here in a minute. Okay, I see some of you are still reading. Perhaps you got a late start, but it would be good to stop now and remember where you stopped. It doesn't have to be terribly precise. You'll get the idea. All right, going back to the slides. Okay, so you have completed step 1. The second step is for students to do a self-assessment. And I have a slide on that, which this is a screenshot. The actual assessment is here. So if it's a face-to-face class, I actually give the students a copy of this. And then I ask them to rate themselves on how they think they did with the reading from 1 to 5. And so I just give them a few minutes to do that. They're just going to do part 1. So if you wouldn't mind making a note of that, you know, in your opinion, how do you think you did with speed, pronunciation, comprehension? As I said, that's sort of an extra, and then the overall fluency. Once you're done with that, if you could, some of you give me a thumbs up, and I'll know it's time to continue. Okay, great. If anyone wants a copy of that simple form, I'm happy to share that. Just let me know and I'll put it in the chat. All right, so now we're going to go back to our master slide, and you have completed step 1 and 2. Now it's time for step 3, which is the step that takes the longest. And in this step, we are going to read the passage together aloud 3 times. The way I do it is I usually start off a little slower and I gradually get faster with the subsequent readings so that by the 3rd reading, I'm reading what is normal speed, normal for me. There are other ways to do this, and I'll touch on that later. But that's how we're going to do it. And then you're going to assess yourselves again. So for right now, we're going to read it together. Now, there's a slight delay with Zoom, as you know, but so far I haven't had problems with this. As long as you're all muted and you're reading with me, it still works. So that's another advantage. It doesn't have to be done in person. It can be done on Zoom. All right, is everybody ready for the first reading? I'm ready. Okay, here we go. Actually, I need to time myself too.
So Claire, are we supposed to read aloud with you or just listen? Remind me.
Yes. Now, some methods have you read it by yourself first. In this method, we're going to read it together. So you've read it once by yourselves, and now you're going to read it 3 times with me. And then we'll go to the next step after that. Are there any other questions?
I'm just curious, from a comment you made, like I'm wondering how far other people read, and I'm wondering how I can, I'm wondering as a learner, should I be worried about how far or not far I got in my time?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Right, this is not a competition.
All right, I'm ready.
And also something to think about, what are the most important things? Is speed the most important thing? Like, is it better if we got farther than others or not? What happens if, to other aspects of clarity, if we read, say, too fast? So, all right, here we go. The time traveler, for so it will be convenient to speak of him, was expounding a recondite matter to us. His pale gray eyes shone and twinkled, and his usually pale face was flushed and animated. The fire burned brightly, and the soft radiance of the incandescent lights in the lilies of silver caught the bubbles that flashed and passed in our glasses. Our chairs, being his patents, embraced and caressed us, rather than submitted to be sat upon. And there was that luxurious after-dinner atmosphere when thought runs gracefully, free of the tremors of precision. And he put it to us in this way, marking the points with a lean forefinger, as we sat and lazily admired his earnestness over his new paradox as we thought it, and his fecundity. All right, take a deep breath, move your shoulders if you're feeling sort of tense and I know this is quite an intense experience. You have to stare at the screen and you have to read and listen, and it's a lot. All right, so second reading. Here we go. The time traveler, for so it will be convenient to speak of him, was expounding a recondite matter to us. His pale gray eyes shone and twinkled, and his usually pale face was flushed and animated. The fire burnt brightly, and the soft radiance of the incandescent lights in the lilies of silver caught the bubbles that flashed and passed in our glasses. Our chairs, being his patents, embraced and caressed us rather than submitted to be sat upon. And there was that luxurious after-dinner atmosphere when thought runs gracefully free of the trammels of precision. And he put it to us in this way, marking the points with a lean forefinger, as we sat and lazily admired his earnestness over this new paradox as we thought it, and his fecundity. Okay, last reading together. Here we go, everybody. Oh, set my timer. All right. The time traveler, for so it will be convenient to speak of him, was expounding a recondite matter to us. His pale gray eyes shone and twinkled, and his usually pale face was flushed and animated. The fire burned brightly, and the soft radiance of the incandescent lights in the lilies of silver caught the bubbles that flashed and passed in our glasses. Our chairs, being his patents, embraced and caressed us rather than submitted to be sat upon. And there was that luxurious after-dinner atmosphere when thought runs gracefully free of the trammels of precision. And he put it to us in this way, marking the points with a lean forefinger, as we sat and lazily admired his earnestness over this new paradox as we thought it, and his fecundity. Congratulations, everybody. Finished a third reading. Well, this is how it feels for our students. All right, so I'll go back to the reading in 1 second. And so we have completed step number 3. So we are making progress, and we're making fast progress. Step number 4 is that you're going to read aloud again by yourself for 1 minute. Actually, this time it's going to be better the way we're doing it for you to read up until the point that you read before. So I ask you to remember where you stopped. Read until that point and pay attention to the time. If you look back at your first recording, you'll see how long it took. Actually, I should have got you to make a note of that. It would have been easier, but hopefully you can see your previous recording and you can see your time. And then your second recording, you're going to read to the same place in the text, and you're going to see how long it took you to get there. It could be a little longer, could be a little shorter, it might be the same. Okay, so you're just going to read the same section that you read. It might not necessarily be where I stopped. Is that clear? All right, so I'll give you a minute to do that. And maybe you'll finish in less than a minute. All right, here we go. Starting now.
We can't see the...
Oh. You mean you haven't memorized it after reading it 4 times? Maybe we should read it 20 times. Sorry about that. Here we go. It's over here. All right. All right, so most of you should have finished. We just went past 1 minute. So hopefully you were able to get your recording. I took a couple of screenshots. I love watching the students. I love watching my students and you reading into your phones and seeing everyone so actively engaged. It's very cool. So now we're at step 5, the final one. So we're almost done with the steps, and it's time to look again at the reading, the self-assessment, and to assess yourselves in part 2. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, is everybody done? Some of you are laughing, that's good. And most of you are still here, that's also good. I haven't scared you away. Okay. So at this point, the students have, they've assessed themselves, and I asked them if they noticed any difference between their first recording by themselves and their second one by themselves. And so that's what I would do with you right now. It is a fairly large group. Karen, do you think we can ask people to speak, or do you want people to put things in the chat?
Sure. I mean, we have some comments already, including my own.
Good.
As folks, maybe go ahead and put your comments in the chat and we can pull out a few. But I already have a question. That's speed. Okay, so speed. Are you considering speed, pronunciation, comprehension as subcomponents of overall fluency, or do you feel like there's more in overall fluency than those 3 previous items?
Well, there's more. There are more components, right, to overall fluency, but I give this form to beginner students or advanced students, everybody. I keep it really simple.
Nice.
And so depending on their level, we might get more into those details, but I usually don't at this point when I'm doing it with students.
Yeah. So Jennifer's commented, Jennifer Gates, that all 4 aspects improved for her. Several of us were faster. Karen Bates, I rated myself high the first time, but I read 14 seconds faster. Felt it was smoother and more fluent overall after practicing.
Okay,
Faster.
so
Yeah.
what do you think are some other things that, students might come up with, and what might they experience, do you think?
Do you mind if I say it? Because it might take a long time to actually type it.
Go ahead.
I was watching the way I paused as we were reading with you to hear how you said a particular word before I then said it and caught up. And I just was observing that would be what my students would do, and probably with quite a few more words, and just observing what that would be like.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely fine. In fact, some teachers will give the instruction at first, you might miss some words. It doesn't matter. You just try to keep up with the instructor. And then hopefully after 3 readings, those gaps or words they missed, they have heard them, even though they didn't say them at all or at the same time as the instructor, but they will have heard them. And the hope is that by the 3rd reading, they will be able to fill in those gaps. So when they read it themselves, they won't have any gaps. They'll be reading all the words. So that's a strategy that is, a useful strategy, right? I'm sure our students will be doing this too. Oh, Dorley, you raised your hand.
Yes, when you first read, you're very unfamiliar with the text. After practicing, you definitely get much better at it. You're confident, you do better pausing, you have a much better sense of what the text is all about. So the practice makes the big difference.
Yes, Dorley, thanks for pointing that out. So the other aspects of pronunciation that maybe, Karen, you were thinking of, like intonation and chunking and pausing and the rhythm and stress and all this, it all happens at once. It's sort of almost like it's on steroids. It's so much in 5 minutes because we're sort of pausing and talking a bit, but it's actually a really fast technique And it's all at once, and they're learning these things without actually realizing or analyzing it like that. Liz? Hi, Liz.
Hi, Claire. I've been listening since the beginning. I just haven't been in front of my computer until now. But I don't think that you said this, but you may have. But the passage that you choose, are your students being exposed to it for the first time? And how much do you care whether they understand it all? Because to me, like fluency, when I hear my students reading something, it's almost like the same thing as comprehension to me. If they're not reading it in a fluent way, or if they're not connecting it the right, then that means to me they don't understand what they're saying. And so I don't really understand. Well, can you tell me how important it is for you to make sure that they already know what the text means, or that they're familiar with the vocabulary and all that?
That is not part of this technique at all. So they're not supposed to worry about not knowing words. Now, it could be used like that. It could be done in a different way, right? This is just the way that I do it. And I use it also a lot as a confidence boost. So they go from, not being able to read it at all sometimes. And by the end, the difference is very noticeable. So that's the value of this. They sort of start, if they're, big lower levels, they might, I shouldn't say that, but beginners, let's say, they start to get a sense of, well, that's how I could sound when I'm fluent in English, when I'm at speaking that way. So they may have not experienced that before.
But
yeah.
But it doesn't matter whether they still don't understand it at the end?
Not for this fluency technique, because this is more about reading fluency, not about reading in a comprehensive way, which obviously would include comprehension. That would be huge, right? So we don't have a lot more time for many more questions. I want to show you some of my students who've experienced this. So I think it might be a good idea if you don't mind holding your questions or putting them in the chat, and then we're going to come back to them once I finish going through more of my slides. Is that okay? So here's the student, here's Max. So yes, I mean, back to what your question was, Liz, they have not seen the text before. So, I just give it to them and they're off with their phone and they do it. So this is Max, and Max is Japanese and he lives in the United States. So this is his first reading. He has not seen the text before.
English spelling is confusing and chaotic, as any student of English knows all too well. How can the...
Can you hear it okay? It sounds a bit quiet. Is it okay?
No, it's quite good, Claire.
All right.
letters all spell so many different sounding words? They ask like dough, bow, rough, and throw. And what about the word like colonel, which clearly contains no R yet, pretends it does, and arch, which its K sound instead of the ch sound of arch. And why does 4 have a U while 40 doesn't it?
Okay. So that's his first reading. And now we'll listen to his second reading, which is after we read it together for three times, just like we did. We did it exactly the same way.
English spelling is confusing and chaotic, as any student of English knows all too well. How can the letters OUGH spell so many different sounding words. They ask like dough, bow, rough, and throw. And what about a word like a cornell, which clearly contains no R yet pretends it doesn't, and arch, which its K sound instead of the ch sound of arch. And why does 4 have a U while 40 doesn't?
So with Max's, I've got some self-assessments here. And really, I chose Max, but I could have chosen any number of my students. The results are very consistent. And I have dozens of these pieces of paper that are also very similar. So Max is over here. It looks like you can see his scores. He gave himself a 2, 3, 3, 2.5, and then 4, 3, 3, 3.5. And he got faster. Did you notice anything else other, besides the fact that he got faster?
The phrasing was better, I thought.
Yeah, it just sounded more fluent. It was much less choppy, right? It wasn't perfect. He still made some mistakes, but you know, the word chaotic, he couldn't do that at all the first time. And then it just like rolled off his tongue really easily by the time he did his second recording. So there are some, just some other results from other students. I think before I show you another recent student, you can listen to a video that she made. I want to show you some resources that are really accessible to us and our students. So most of these actually come in different levels, except for I'd say ESL bits, that's more advanced. And some of them, you know, are not necessarily fascinating stories, but I'll click on a couple so that you can see just what is on offer online. So this is ESL Fast. And students seem to really like it, even though the stories are not very interesting. I've had students really enjoy these. They can choose their level and they can read with the narrator.
Tom just got hired at the ice cream shop. It was called Creamy Goodness.
Okay, so it goes like that. And then when they read it, they can set the time over here. And when they start reading, it'll highlight the text as they read at that speed, and they can adjust the speed. Okay, so that's just one side. And these are in the, you know, in the slides, so you can explore them more in depth yourselves. And this is another one that I used quite a lot. Just trying to see if I opened this before. Because this one is really set up for duet reading. So if we choose, say, an intermediate level, and then we can choose a topic. Let's talk about, maybe they want to read about environmental health. This comes with a timer for the 1-minute reading when they're recording themselves. But the narrator actually reads the entire text. So this just is another option. And that you'll notice that the first reading starts slower.
Level 7. Environmental health.
It takes 3 minutes.
First reading. You are in an environment right now.
See, that's pretty slow. But second reading is 2 minutes and 11 seconds. And the third reading is even faster.
Third reading. You are in an environment right now. It is anywhere you are.
Okay, so that is much more like normal speed. But starting out slowly can be really helpful so that they don't miss too many words, so that they can, you know, they have a chance to listen and repeat when the narrator is reading. And then the other one I wanted to show you, because this is my student's new favorite one, and actually was a student who told me about this site, is Deep English. The topics are more current. The layout, you can see it's just much more slick. And so you go here, it's free to set it up, go to free lessons. So I've given this site to my students. After they've learned the technique, I'll ask them to do something like this for homework. And they'll send me a recording of their first and their second recording. And they choose the topic themselves. So they just go, to a link like this. Several of them chose this topic of unlikely love stories. So I'll click on that one. And here the narrator offers 3 different speeds.
Deepenglish.com. People often say.
Okay, I'm not going to demonstrate the speeds because I think it's going to be quite obvious, but let me just actually play you the fast one, and you'll hear the fast is really fast, I think.
Deepenglish.com. People often say that love turns up in the unlikeliest of places, or that love will serendipitously find you when you least expect it. In some love stories,
That's a little faster than I read. The other nice thing about this that my students love is, back to what you were saying, Liz, if they are curious and they're working by themselves and they want to know what a word is, they choose their language over here. And, I work with a lot of Ukrainian students, and a lot of these sites don't translate into Ukrainian yet, but this site does. So they love that, and they can click on a word and it'll tell them the translation. So they absolutely love this. This is, I'd say, of those resources, is definitely the new favorite. And then I want to quickly show you this before I play you a very short video of my student. If you haven't come across this site, this is an amazing site called Natural Reader. And you can put in a text. Let's say you have a student who wants to practice a presentation or, just their own thing. They can go here and copy and paste their text in here.
Hi there, my name is Graham Smith, Marketing Coordinator.
That was not supposed to happen. And then they can choose a narrator. They can choose, I think I have it set on Jane, but here's some others. Look, we have Tony, we have a bunch more. I think there may be an option, or there's going to be soon, where you can choose someone with a certain accent. And you can listen to that person reading it and read at the same time, doing the same method. So there are all these new things that are coming up that just makes it so much more exciting and more accessible. All right, so I just have one more short video to show you. As I mentioned, I asked my students to pick one of those readings and do the method by themselves for homework. And this is Natalia reading one of those.
When you listen to someone speaking in a foreign language that you're unfamiliar with, can you pick up any meaning? Surprisingly, most people can, because a lot of body language is universal, and up to 90% of all communications is nonverbal. However, most of spoken language isn't universal, and there is a limited number of words which are the same across all languages. Modern linguists
I think, Karen, are we running a bit short of time? Maybe I should speed it up.
No, we're okay. I think as long as folks know a couple things, we typically go for an hour, but we might go a little longer. And of course, if you need to leave, this is a recorded session. It will be posted in the teachers community at learn.colorvowel.com. Hey, Claire, I see lots of color vowel strategy going on here, by the way. I love how she's marking the content and focus words with her hand. Is there a little color vowel going on here as well?
Yes, actually, some of her previous videos, it's much clearer. She's really doing it a lot. In this one, it's almost like she doesn't realize she's doing it. That's also what I sort of like about it. It's sort of become such a habit to her that she's just sort of doing it while reading. Yeah. That's how it seems to me in this particular video. But definitely, they were all doing it. So this is her first reading of the text that she has not read before.
Beginning to study these universal words. Mark Dingemans is researching one of these rare words. What's remarkable about this universal word is that it conveys the meaning of I don't understand. The word huh is a universal term understood in almost every language.
So she said lots of practice. So we don't know how many times she practiced, but that's how she described it. It would be at least 3 times.
Okay.
You listen to someone speaking in a foreign language that you're unfamiliar with. Can you pick up any meaning? Surprisingly, most people can, because a lot of body language is universal. And
actually, I'm just going to stop it because what she's doing here might not be apparent. She's got her AirPods in and she's reading with the narrator on the fast speed.
Up to 90% of all communication is nonverbal. However, most of spoken language isn't universal, and there is a very limited number of words which are the same across all languages. Modern linguists are beginning to study these universal words. Mark Dingimansa is researching one of these rare words. What's remarkable about this universal word is that it conveys the meaning of "I don't understand." The word "huh" is a universal term understood in almost every language. When you listen to someone speaking in a foreign language that you're unfamiliar with, can you pick up any meaning? Surprisingly, most people can, because a lot of body language is universal, and up to 90% of all communication is nonverbal. However, most of spoken language isn't universal, and there is a very limited number of words which are the same across all languages. Modern linguists are beginning to study these universal words. Mark Dingimansa is researching one of these rare words. What's remarkable about this universal word is that it conveys the meaning of "I don't understand." The word "huh" is a universal term understood in almost every language. When you listen to someone speak.
So she read it 3 times. Which version do you think was the best or the clearest?
Nothing in the chat. I'm going to venture. Do folks agree that I thought the last one sounded pretty good. Any thoughts? Okay. Yeah, the last one.
And so why was that?
Yeah, Charlene commented it was when she was speaking with the teacher, which I think was the second time. Is that right, Claire?
Yes.
And then the third was her doing it on her own without any audio. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, so folks are saying, she was able to practice with a model. She had some confidence in that last one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So, a lot of these students are advanced speakers, but when they did this activity, several of them commented on the fact that they realized they actually needed to slow down, because the faster they went, the more they sacrificed in terms of being easily understood. And so that was sort of an interesting realization for them. And even when they speak, they realize that they need to just slow down a little bit and take their time. And so color vowels are helping a lot with that, because if they're using their open hand technique and they're using it, regularly with their speech, it will slow them down, and it does. So it's sort of a package. They've got the app, and it's a comprehensive pronunciation program. So there are many different components to it, but if they're practicing all these different things, it guides them to a reasonable speed, a more natural speed. And that was for many of them, their realization that they need to slow it down. And then maybe there's some advantage in practicing reading something faster than you would normally. I have not done that, and I haven't practiced that with my students, but I can see the benefit of it with this site, Deep English, because a lot of my students are doing that. So they're doing the really fast one, and then they're taking a step back and doing it at their speed. And that's where they settle. And it seems to be working really well. So as I said, this is a very adaptable technique, I think. And I'm still learning. I'm learning from my students. And this is where I'm sort of at with it at the moment. I don't know if you want me to play this 30-second clip of this lady after she finishes her duet reading. Shall we do that quickly?
Oh, yes, you promised. We'd love to see that.
All right. load that. So this is a woman who, she's practicing cross-generational reading. She wants to be able to read to her grandchild. And I'm not going through the steps, but what's good about this video is it does go over the steps again. It doesn't have an assessment, but they do this reading together 3 times, and then she reads it by herself. She also doesn't read it in the beginning by herself. It's a little different than mine. But anyway, she goes through the steps, and at the end, she reads it by herself, and that's the part I'm going to show you. But if you want to, you look up this project at the San Jose Library, they have some wonderful resources. All right, so it's right at the end.
When they do that, I could change. Wow. I hear, yeah, that was.
And I don't think you felt. I don't think you felt confident. Even the 3rd time we were doing it together, you were getting a little frustrated.
Yeah.
But wow,
yeah.
When you did it by yourself, it was.
I
perfect.
could even feel the droop and the up.
Yes,
yes.
Yeah, the expression was great. The speed was great.
Yeah, I did.
No words tripped you up. So
that was good.
What?
Okay, that's her reaction, because in my other recordings, they don't really capture the emotions of how the students feel at the end when they hear themselves. And, you know, they're feeling good after this. They're feeling like, I can do this. And of course, it doesn't automatically translate to how they speak, but they get a sense of what that might be. And it happens very fast. So that concludes my slides, except for just asking you a few questions. Just if you wouldn't mind spending a moment reflecting, and perhaps you could put your responses in the chat so we can see them. About how confident do you feel about the process? It would be good if you could put your responses all together, like 1, 2, and 3, if you have comments, so that we can keep track. So we know which one you're answering. How likely are you to try this with your students? And if there's any takeaway moment. An aha moment, Karen, you always call it an aha moment.
I already see a lot going on in the chat that suggests that folks here are excited. Okay. One thing, Liz said it really well. It's a lot of bang for the buck. It's a very specific set of procedures. Liz, you want to elaborate on that comment? It's a lot of bang for the buck.
I mean, in 5 minutes, like I would make sure that they understood, more or less understood the text. But yeah, it's great. 5 minutes,
Yeah.
No, I can't elaborate. I'm sorry. That's all I have to say.
Well, one thing I was thinking, we talked a little bit about how do you select the text. What if they select their own text? They select something that interests them. Then we know already that they have a schematic connection with the text. We don't have to worry about that because they've selected it. And that's enough to go on.
Yes, and that's what's nice about these sites that are online. If they're working independently, they can choose to read about whatever they want to. And that makes it more likely that they'll actually do it.
Yeah, so you add choice to that, and they naturally are going to gravitate towards a topic that interests them and something that looks accessible enough to them.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty neat.
And also, I think the surprise factor is part of what makes this successful. I'm not saying it's a bad idea to have them look over the text and understand the words, but it is supposed to be a struggle the first time. Just like when we read it, when I first read that passage, it was kind of complicated, long sentences. What are they talking about? Big words. That is that's actually part of the point of it, is that they just get faced with this, that they have to suddenly read. And I think that there's going to be there's more likely to be a bigger contrast after practicing if they just get thrown in the deep end and they don't have a chance to see it. But, like I said, there are many different ways to do this. This is just the way I do it.
Claire, Jennifer Gates here in the chat has said, she's raised a really good point about sort of the logistics or the classroom setting. She says, how do you track that they're completing the activities? How do they, in other words, how do you collect just confirmation that they've done it and what the outcomes were? Have you managed multiple students through this kind of process?
So and if it's an in-person, if it's a class, it's really easy because I give them each the self-assessment, and then the reading that we do is the same. So we're going through each step just like we did, and they're all there and we do it all together. So that part's really easy. When I do it online, we're also doing it all together. Of course, if it's just one student, if it's a private lesson, I actually do the recording. And I ask them which I should circle, and that's how I get to collect all this data, and I have all these forms. That's if it's one-to-one. But if it's a bigger group, I obviously can't do that. So I asked them to do it just like I did you. I asked you to do it, write it down, make a note, and then they can share that with me. And then the idea is that they are going to go out and practice this by themselves. Now, of course, they may choose not to do the self-assessment. If they just want to make it simpler, they don't have to do that every time. What's important is that they're reading with the narrator. And, if it becomes an option. That's why I think in the slide itself, I wrote optional over here. Right over here, optional. Maybe they won't do that every time. It doesn't stay something so important. I want them to learn the method and to practice it.
So I was wondering if you have any suggestions for me if I were to, after we've done it as a class together and after they've learned the technique, how could I kind of assign it and have some accountability that they've done it? Have you ever listened to recordings and say, oh, I approve, yes, you've improved, or anything like that?
Thank you. You just asked a really good question that I probably should include in this presentation. Yeah, so my students, they send me their recordings. And then I give them feedback. So I have dozens of them on my phone. And I respond, and it's always, also focus on color vowels and whatever we're doing. Like if we're, practicing TH this week and they make mistakes with TH, that might be a focus area for that week. But it's always about the color vowels and about their pronunciation. I basically give them individual feedback. And I send it as a recording or a video so that they have it. And, so some of them, for most of the group, they don't have a problem with rolling their R's, but there are a few students that are. So I'll say, I noticed this. And if you're, people will understand you if you roll your R's, but if you want to sound more natural, let me know and I'd be happy to send you a video and, you can practice it again or something like that. And they always say yes. I mean, I try to do it in a gentle way and I don't give them too many corrections at one time, but if I feel like they're ready for something more, I'll give them that personal feedback and then I'll help coach them on the side.
I wanted to note, I think the student that you played for us, the male student, he was reading a text that was about how tricky pronunciation can be in English with respect to how it's spelled, right? I think it had words like through and so and all those kind of tricky, the ones that end up in memes. And so that's kind of a neat focus as well, because it just lends itself to grabbing the color vowel organizer and putting them in there.
Exactly. And so it could be developed into that. It could be developed into a color vowel lesson. I mean, there's so many things that we could do with a text like that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
For those interested in action research, just sort of answering that question that was raised earlier of, well, how much does this carry over into spontaneous spoken fluency? That's a really great leading question for action research. I just wanted to sort of say, that's the kind of thing that any one of us and many of us could do just to see how big a bang for the buck is it. So it certainly, feeds the imagination. It's pretty exciting.
Yes. So how can they get that feeling of fluency when they're just speaking? So if you want, Karen, if you want to go for a few minutes over time, we could do a little sharing. If someone has something to share about an activity you do to help them to speak more fluently, this might be a good time for that.
I think that's a great idea. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Claire. First of all, let's just do a little bit of gratitude, applause for Claire. Very exciting content, really. I think a lot of people are thinking new thoughts.
You're so welcome. But I forgot to share my last slide, which has my contact information. Can I just show that?
Absolutely.
And then if you have any questions or would like to contact me afterwards, please do. I'd love to hear from you. And here you can reach me this way. I'm also on LinkedIn. And oh yes, I wanted to wish you fun practicing duet reading to improve fluency. Black cat fast. Yes, 5 minutes. 5 steps in 5 minutes. And here's my email.
And Claire, can they pose questions to you in the teachers community?
Oh, sure. Yeah, will I get alerted or do I need to check that?
We can help alert you.
Okay. I will try to keep an eye on it, especially the next week or so. But if I miss something, please let me know. I'd be happy to, look at it there.
Great. Lots of good questions raised earlier and on our minds. We're going to open up the floor. Comments and questions. Anybody excited about going off and doing a version of this pretty soon with a student? Yeah? Okay. Any changes you can imagine yourself making just to adapt it to your particular audience? We'd love to hear those kinds of ideas. You do this naturally. Hi, Zia.
Hey, I was just thinking that it would, like as several people have mentioned, that they want it to have that vocabulary and, be comprehension and everything. And I just think it's a great opportunity to build, to scaffold into, to create like different lesson activities all around it, starting with that. And then they can, pull out vocabulary words and you can create a vocabulary activity that you could play with them. And so I just was wanting to expand on that question that somebody asked about that, because I think that this is a great opportunity for that. But I really like also that it's not about that for this exercise. Like, I think there's no need to change anything. I think it's just, why not add on to it and apply new, create new activities that build on it. So I wouldn't change a thing. I think Claire's, what she showed us was really cool because, for one thing, people could gain confidence regardless of their level of understanding every little thing. And I think that's important because it's more of almost like it's coming from the inside, like they relax into it with each time they do it, to the point that they're suddenly, some of these things just start to come naturally. And I think that then it's not as hard to pick apart the thing and then pull those vocabulary words out that they want to learn about.
Well noted. Doug, did you want to, and Suzanne. So
Yeah.
Doug and then Suzanne.
Yeah, I do something very similar. I use articles from ReadWorks. And there's a couple of interesting things about that is I'll give them an article that I'll use several times during the course of study. So we'll go through a reading exercise with an article, and then maybe a few weeks later, we'll pull that same article up where they're familiar with what the words are and how to read it. And I'll have them go through and identify all of the past tense verbs, for example, or all of the superlatives and comparatives. And so we'll use the same article again to make sure that some of that comprehension starts to come out. And the other thing that I do is I use ReadWorks because they have the narrator already there reading the story to them, and they're small articles. But then when we do something like when we do a reader's theater description or performance, then I have to make the recording for them. And it seems to work out really good there too for building confidence when they're in almost a conversational mode when they're working in reader's theater. Just a comment.
Yep. It really puts a lot into the idea of less is more. We just do more with one thing instead of a bunch of things with a bunch of things. Beautiful, Doug. How about you, Suzanne?
So I love the reader's theater idea, Doug. Thank you. Since the Intercambio program is really focused on conversation and speaking, one of the things that I think I could do with this that might be really interesting to see how it would affect all of the skills is we start every lesson with a dialogue that they listen to. And so I can see then using this method with that dialogue as a group activity in class and then putting them in pairs and having them practice it in pairs. So that's just one idea I have, but I like the idea of the reading together kind of in unison 3 times to improve the fluency for the purpose of conversation more than reading for our program.
Hi, Pat, or not Pat. So funny. Hi, Anna. I see that.
I'm sorry. I just saw that I'm still on my work Zoom account. So I want to just touch on something Suzanne was saying, and that is the issue of dialogues, where you have the written English and then there's the spoken English. So one of the things that I'm working on, for instance, is the whole idea of reductions. And of course, because we're on Zoom, we do see, like, for instance, what are you doing is not going to be what are you doing, it's going to be what are you doing. So when you read that, like if you're reading the spoken word or dialogue, Claire, what would you do? Would you read that immediately as what are you doing? Or are you going to say, what are you doing?
Well, I think because of the context, you mentioned that, you're practicing everyday speech and how do we actually say things, then you would just practice it like that.
But what about if it's like a fiction and there's dialogue in the fiction, so you're going to read it the way that it would be spoken in dialogue?
I would read it the way it's written because they're reading that. Yeah, I would. Otherwise, it might be confusing unless that's a focus of the lesson. Oh, how do we shorten these kinds of phrases? But otherwise, it would add a level of complication, I think. Yeah.
Although I think in naturally reading, we may just even do that without knowing it.
Exactly.
Naturalize the dialogue. So if it comes up and they notice, then we have something to talk about.
Exactly, yeah. And I will say that one thing that I would like to emphasize is apparently the reading together 3 times is really important. I mean, you could try it doing it once or twice, and I've done that. It does make a difference. And I remember Kathy emphasizing that, and that seems to be the magic number. And I mean, if you do it more than that, would you really have liked to read it, 4, 5, 8 times? I mean, there comes a point when, you're kind of, okay, it's enough, time to move on. So I think the 3 times, they might not, read it perfectly, but it's enough of a leap where they can feel really good. They're not exhausted or too fed up with it. That seems to be important.
Back to the question of comprehension, there was a phrase in the text that you had us read, Claire, that sort of stopped me in my tracks every time we read it. And I think, folks, do you know what I'm talking about? We all kind of know what that little passage was. Lisa knows what it was. Maybe we had all different things, but I think there's one little phrase. What was that, Lisa? Do you remember?
Something about the silver something or other off the glasses. I actually didn't understand that part, even, and it bugged the heck out of me because I was reading quite fast, and I thought, what does that mean? What's happening here? And my students would feel the same. They'd get frustrated not being able to understand it.
But I was thinking, that with the kinds of strategies we teach, for example, and this is very sort of Kate Kinsella stuff, Brock can appreciate this. Hi, Brock. That if we're training them how to use classroom language, like, I don't understand this, or I'd like you to explain that. Those phrases are the ones we teach as high frequency classroom, questions that we want to master in terms of rhythm, pronunciation. And then I would say, teacher Claire, can you show us that passage just briefly? And then I'll get to Dorley's question. But I want to drive home this. I think it's actually kind of exciting that Claire found a text with parts of it that were sort of perplexing to us. So Claire, if you, I don't know if you have that handy, and it's funny, Lisa, that part, the silver part got me, but there's another one. There's a little dependent, I don't know, a little clause, like 2 words. It's like in process or in. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Liz, you got that?
No. Do you want to see the text?
Yeah. Show it to us. I'm dying to see it again.
Was it got a bee in her bonnet?
Yeah, I do. I have a bee in my bonnet.
Well, I'm glad that you had these, you felt these emotions, because that's what I was hoping, because that is what happens to our students. Like Lisa, you were saying your students will be frustrated. Well, I ask them, and if it's something that really is driving them crazy, I probably would veer from the technique and just let them know what the word is, or let's work on that word if it's going to be such a distraction.
Yeah.
But I ask them for feedback. They will tell you, this was really frustrating because I didn't understand it. Or they might say, you'll find out from them.
Yeah.
You might be surprised.
Well, for the third line, it's the third line down, by the way, folks, on the right side where it says our chairs being his patents, that's the one that every time I thought, what the heck is that? And so I would want students to then, use that cognitive dissonance to say, I'm going to use that phrase I learned, which is, could you please explain being his patents? And even, having a pause. And that's how we really ask questions in academic settings is, if we're going to quote something. So I just thought that's really neat because it is a bee in my bonnet.
Well, that was my question that I posted that after the first reading was when you deal with vocabulary, because the whole thing about the silver lilies and the sparkling and flashing just stopped me, because I stopped and reread it trying to comprehend. And the being our patents, I went, that just means he invented them, he created them. But there were a couple of points and I was like, Sean, which way should I say it? And because I never know how to say that word. And then the recondite, that kind of got me. But I mean, it really impacted my fluency. And so that's my question was, either should we try to pick something that doesn't contain vocabulary that's going to affect them, or do you deal with that vocabulary beforehand, knowing that it's going to hold them up? Anyway, that was my question.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, if I can sort of, I'm still excited about this. I think there's a benefit to wanting to know the bee in the bonnet. There aren't too many bees. To extend my terrible metaphor, if there were too many bees, that's pretty dangerous. But if there's one bee, we can deal with that. Or if there are 2 or 3 words in a passage that really lead us or drive us to ask the questions that are written on the wall, then it's a really authentic use of the language you're trying to teach, right?
Yes, and actually, I mean, this is a topic for another day, but I actually never pre-teach vocabulary. I know that might be mind-blowing, but I do it in a different way. And back to the bee in the bonnet, it's when they read those words. Well, first of all, I have not, maybe it's a little different for us as very fluent speakers. I haven't experienced my students getting frustrated by that for some reason. Maybe they're just trying to get through the text. They're trying to keep up with me. They're thinking of maybe slightly different. Maybe they're just not analyzing as much as we do as, fluent speakers reading a text. And we expect to understand everything we read, right? So when we see something unusual, it's sort of like, oh, what is that word? But I think there's an advantage in them not knowing all the words, because then they're primed. And if you do develop the lesson and come back to those things, their brain is already activated by that word. They're more likely to remember that word. And after they, you help them figure out what that word is. So it's actually an effective way, I think, for them to learn vocabulary without having the pre-teaching method.
Hi, Dorley. You have a question or a comment?
A mixture. Basically, I wanted to know if this practicing reading aloud with all the value that we have already seen, if you have observed that it also serves as a bridge or encouragement for them to actually go out and wanting to read more on their own silently, like being encouraged to stick their nose in the books for pleasure reading.
Oh, okay. I have not
build readers
study that, but it definitely encourages them to say, take another passage on a site if it's on a website. Oh, we've done this in class with Claire. I already know how to do this. I can do it again by myself. That I've seen, but I don't know in terms of, that would be an interesting topic for somebody to study and research. That would be fantastic.
Wonderful. Hey, folks, I want you to know that this is a recorded session and we post this and all of our Fridays at sessions in our Color Vowel Teachers Community. Couple of upcoming sessions. They don't have pretty graphics yet, but they will. We do one of these per month, and the next one in October will be on making the most of your virtual background for effective online teaching. I know that's not everybody's situation, but it certainly is a lot of us. And I'll be sharing a little bit of how I manage my virtual. We'll be inviting others who have done some innovative things. Okay. And then in November, we'll have a session on shared wisdom for just integrating Color Vowel strategies into your lesson, meaning content lessons and life skills lessons, and not Color Vowel lessons, but rather, the lessons we really need to go out and teach. So that's just, I'd love to hear from any of you that have insights and would like to co-present with me in these sessions. I love to turn into merely a facilitator the way I have today. So thank you for that. If you'd like to join the teachers community and you're not already in it, you can go to learn.colorvowel.com. Jennifer is in the room, maybe. Are you still here, Jennifer? We're excited. I wanted to say we're excited. So white tie excited. We do have a conference that we have booked here in Washington, D.C. For April 5th and 6th. That's 5 and 6 of 2024 at Planet Word. That is a language museum here in Washington, D.C. We're thrilled to be able to host that conference there at the conference at the museum. It will be a Color Vowel conference. So save the date. More info coming soon. Dorley, is your hand still up or was that left over? Okay, left over. Closing comments. Listen, folks, we're going to continue this conversation over in that teachers community. So if you have more or you want to ask a question, we'll make sure that Claire knows that there's a question waiting for her. We'll give her our own notification. Okay.
I will be checking it. It would be really cool because, after we do these have these sort of workshops, I'm always curious to know, what do people do with it? And I'd be so curious to hear, how you have experienced it, or, successes, challenges, anything, just to know, because I just think it would be really interesting.
There was a question, just a technical one about when we get notified. Liz had a question about the Teachers Lounge. The lounge no longer exists as a lounge, but I'll say that when you're over here in this community, this is part of our learning platform. When you're interested in something, if you mark interested, which I can't because I'm in here as a different person, but you'll get a notification that this event is coming. So mark yourself as interested in anything you want to attend. You'll get that notification. If you're interested in our digital library for Color Vowel trained level 1 teachers, I think that might be your question, Liz. Is that?
No, I wanted to know if it's possible to get notified when new things are posted there. Like I wanted to see Claire's websites again, and somebody said they'll be posted on that website, and I want to know if there's a way to get notification when there's other things.
Jennifer, can you elaborate? I think you can go into your profile and set your settings for what kinds of notifications you're going to get. Okay.
Okay.
Jennifer will need to unmute in order to be heard.
Sorry about that. You can follow threads, and you can also set your, like Karen said, you can set your desire for notifications. It's still a work in progress, and this platform just recently introduced these communities. A lot of it will depend on your email provider and whether or not they will allow these notifications. So you can set it, you can follow things. Hopefully you'll get an email notification. Just make checking it part of your everyday routine.
I will also mention, since we're talking about networking, that our Facebook community is, for a while I thought one is replacing the other, but these are two equally valuable and differently valuable communities. We know that if you use Facebook, you know how much in your pocket it is and how it notifies you about involvement in a thread. And just this week, I want to just Thank you, Liz. I was just looking through the videos over there and I was astounded at how much good stuff is over there, including a lot of authentic, actual instructional videos that Liz has shot here and there through her years with Color Vowel and just sharing what she does. And I would love to see more of that, by the way, just from anybody who's teaching. Okay. Not an assignment to Liz, but an inspiration.
The other difference is that when you go into the Facebook community, you know that everybody there has at least purchased one of our something that had our book in it. So that was sort of the gateway to getting into that community. The teachers community is open to anybody, whether they're Color Vowel trained or not. And you know, just keep that in mind. And a lot of people don't like Facebook. They don't like the way it tracks them, and they don't like seeing all the ads and everything. So, you know, if you're not a Facebook person or a social media person, the teachers community is an alternative there. And so we're trying to build a following there. And so feel free to post comments, questions, videos, files. It's a little easier to share materials through that as well.
Great. So watch for that recording there. Keep in touch. We want to thank Claire one more time. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing just your experience and your expertise. Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for hanging in till the very end, everybody.
Yeah. No, loved having you here. Good to see so many familiar faces. Please tell a friend about what we do and keep in touch. Happy weekend, everyone.
Thanks, Karen. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.